Welcome to the Integrate and Ignite podcast. Avocet Communications was started in the basement of my parents' home. Eric Olden started his first business from his dorm room at UC Berkeley. That's how a lot of entrepreneurs get started out. They're scrappy, determined, and focused. Join me and Eric, CEO of Strata Identity, and the visionary behind Maverick's multi-cloud identity orchestration platform as we talk about intuition, innovation, and how perfect can be the enemy of good, and his unique way of looking at business growth, which, by the way, was inspired by his love for surfing and the ocean. Learn about market readiness, the creating new markets, and why you should look for people who tell you that's not possible so that you can prove them wrong. We hope that you enjoy this next episode of Integrate and Ignite. Welcome to the Integrate and Ignite podcast. I am so excited to have Eric Olden with us today from Strata. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Lori.
I tell you, I am so excited to chit chat today. We're just going to dive into all sorts of interesting insights. Before we get there, tell us a little bit more about your journey and what led you to starting Strata.
Yeah, so thanks again for having me, and been looking forward to the show. And to answer your question on our background or my background, I've been, as I tell my wife, a security nerd for a long time. And 27 years now I've been in.
Oh my gosh.
Cybersecurity. Yeah.
You were like way ahead of security before security came cloud security.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Coincidence, being in the right place at the right time. I was in college and at UC Berkeley, and the internet came through, and I said, geez, let's build something for that. I think that's going somewhere. And two dorm guys, and a couple of years later we had 300 employees, and things really took off. But yeah, that was a hell of a way to go through college. But I did get my degree, so my mom. But yeah, it's been a while. It's been fun.
Well, that's fantastic. And so, I mean, it's truly kind of that Steve Jobs story. You were in dorm rooms. Avocet started in the basement of my parents' home. and Steve Jobs, of course, when it was in his garage, that was really early on. You were young. You obviously were intuitive because you knew, what could be and what might be needed. When did the light bulb go off for you? And you realize that, okay, there's something's going to need to be, put in place here. And I want to be at the forefront.
Yeah. It was interesting the way that we got into security was I was the chief technology officer. So I was responsible for all the software and the product itself. And when we were getting started, we're talking really early in days in the web, like 1996 was when we got started. And the kind of state of the art back then was you had to cobble everything together. And the idea that you can rely on the internet the way that you do it today with confident security and encryption and all those things, none of that was there. You had to build it. And so we had to kind of we put together a way to do that. And we had done it very early before anyone else had figured it out. And through some kind of Silicon Valley hustle, one thing led to the next. And I had met this CIO of Cisco, and I think I was like 26-year-old kid. And I chased Mr. Solvig up to the escalator, and I said, hey, I understand you need a way to secure your e-commerce site, and we have a way to do that, and would love to show it to you. And he said, well, here's my card, talk to this person, and his phone number was on it. And so I turned around at the top of the escalator and I looked down at my partner and I said, I told you, John T, I get the number. And it's like, what are you talking about? And then I said, well, that was the head of IT for Cisco. And he says,
Wow.
they're going to work with us? Are they crazy? And I said, well, they don't know. It's just a handful of guys up in a loft here in Berkeley. So let's just focus on the software. And
Yeah.
then one thing led to the next, and the software worked. And, we went from Cisco to Wells Fargo to Lehman Brothers, and
Wow. Oh
we had
my
all these
goodness.
customers, and we're like, oh shoot. So that happened a little bit unexpectedly, but it was, I think, a big part of it was just trying.
Right.
What's the saying? You miss 100% of the shots that you don't
You
take.
don't
So
take. Yeah, I agree. And as you're telling your story, which I love, I'm envisioning you, 30 years ago at Berkeley. And certainly that organization, that school breeds innovation and a lot of disruptive technology. You're in classes. Did you think that you'd ever be an entrepreneur, or were you there to just get a degree?
I've always been very entrepreneurial. I actually was an entrepreneur and put myself through college because I love to surf. And I'll wind back a little bit. Back in high school, I grew up in Silicon Valley, so I was in the South Bay in the Bay Area, and I would go. I had a brother in San Diego State, so when I got my license, my parents let me drive down to San Diego to hang out with my brother, go surfing, and that was fun. And I picked up a car magazine because I was going to buy a car. And to make a long story short, I discovered in the late 80s that there was a significant price disparity between San Diego Wrangler Jeeps and what they sell from the Bay Area. So
Interesting.
my
Oh,
business
I
was,
light bulb is going off.
yeah. And so I would go down, I drive a car, I check out a Jeep. I got really good at knowing what Jeeps are good and bad. And then I would drive it, surf on put it for sale. And when someone bought it, I'd go to and do it another time. And it sure was a lot more fun being able to, do that and have as much time to surf as I wanted. And then fast forward into college, and it's like, oh, well, I, just need to pay for school. So let me keep doing that. And it worked. And so eventually it kind of changed my perception that, the I'm going to work for someone else. And I just, I guess, got really comfortable with that uncertainty and just make it happen, because when it works, it's like nothing else.
Yeah, I think surfing has a lot to do with ultimately where you take your businesses too. If I remember correctly, with our pre-show discussion, you were on a surf trip with your college roommates when the actual idea for Strata came up, right? So what is it about the waves and the board and the sea salt and everything that just sparks that innovation in you?
Yeah, there's a couple things about surfing that I found are really apt metaphors for entrepreneurial startups and things like that. A couple of them from a physics standpoint is that waves, they build over time, and so you can have one wave collapse with another, what's called doubling up, where now the two waves become twice as powerful as the one wave. And when you think about that metaphorically with the market, from a identity and security standpoint, the first wave that we saw in the early 2000s was people figuring out how to do secure stuff on the web. And then the second wave was bigger than that, but it collapsed into the first one. And that was, how do you secure things when you're using SaaS applications that don't sit inside?
Right.
And then we find ourselves here in a third wave, which is when all of the clouds are everywhere and your applications and
Right.
users are everywhere. It became a much bigger market. So those first two waves collapsed into the third one. So now it multiplies. And so we have a much, much bigger market right now. And another thing about a big wave is it moves fast.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's also what's happening in this market. As I look at the two other security companies that I started and wound up selling, this one's moving even faster than the other ones. And I think it's a kind of a reflection of just the tempo and things that are happening in the world right now. This digital transformation, people are just pent up demand and all the change that happened with remote working from
Right.
COVID and all that. So, a lot of the conditions are great to surf. And so that's what I found, the time is right to build a company. Because if
Right.
you kind of, like, another aspect of that from a surfing standpoint is, if let's say you plan a trip to Hawaii and you want to go surf on your vacation, well, it's beyond your control if there's any waves there, right? If you go
Hmm.
there, things could happen and the timing's not right. So I think that's another key thing about startups and surfing, is that you got to make sure the timing is right. And
Right.
if you go out to the market before the market's ready, it's going to be really expensive. And
Hmm.
you got to educate the market and get them ready. And then, you know, be around when the wave does pick up so you can actually ride it. So
So that's all about reading the waves, right? So what is it about you and your ability to build companies that obviously are very, very successful that you would share with our listeners today about reading the waves, about, those whale signs, if you will, about when the next great technology needs to be developed? And, the other thing that I think could be difficult as well is you've sold the two companies, you've rode the waves, but had you just settled on that first one, it would have been a far more difficult journey. And instead, you built the company, sold it, built the next one, sold it, and here you are on 3.0, and really doing an amazing job meeting customer need.
yeah, you're hitting on one of the most important, that is the customer need. And
Mhm.
in early markets, like, the other issue that I've just kind of dealt with is creating brand new markets.
Mhm.
So being the first in a market, that is really uniquely challenging when you're creating a market, because you got to do so many things to make it all. You got to lift a lot of other ancillary things and make people even understand that you have a problem that can be solved. And
Right.
so you time that right, but going in with an open mind, where what's worked for me is knowing how to ask very open-ended questions. It sounds obvious, but
Mhm.
if you're not asking really hard questions to people that say, what do you really need? Why is that the number one thing that's on your mind? And ask enough people so you don't get the bias where they're trying to be friendly and tell you what they think you want to hear.
Right.
Strangers, that's a huge amount of work. At Strata, we spent a year and a half talking to the market and saying, well, before we shipped software, we were saying, hey, what do we have to solve here?
Right.
So that is a different approach than saying, hey, I got an idea, I'm going to build a mousetrap and bring it to market and figure out who I can sell it to. It's kind of, you reverse it and really be deliberate to only build the thing that people really need.
Right.
So I think that kind of being sensitive and listening to things has made a big that, to me, sets you in the right direction. And then the other piece, that when you think about starting a new market, is expect people and look for people to say that's not possible.
Right.
I love that, because every single one of my companies, I was told what I wanted to do simply was not possible. That would
Mhm.
never work because it's so radically different than what the conventional wisdom is. But that's where the opportunity is.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you're just chasing the same thing that everyone else is doing. And you'll see all the big breakouts happen when someone went right instead of left, when the herd mentality is going a certain way. That's kind of the nature of a disruption. But it's one thing to read about it in a book, and it's another to be there in that customer development meeting when the person who you really respect is telling you they think you're crazy and that
Right.
it can't be done. You have to say, I
That
hear
just
you.
spooled me up that much more.
Exactly. I hear you, but I'm going to try.
Yeah.
And when it works, then you go back to the person and say, hey, remember what you thought couldn't be done? Do you want to try it? Because it works now. And that's just something that's like magic, startup magic for me.
Yeah, I love that. And you're bringing up something that I think I'd like to dissect a little bit more. And that is the research needed to make sure that you are bringing a viable product to market, that people believe, well, they don't necessarily need to believe they have a need for it, but they need to know that it will make their life easier on some level. And most startup companies, well, the two primary reasons they go out of business is funding. They spend, all the money and they don't have any left. But what leads to them and the lack of funding is no research. They haven't done the research needed to make sure that they do have the right product fit for the market. And even if it's a new category strategy, which is really what you're talking about here, I don't know if each one was a new category strategy, but the cloud to cloud solution is definitely one. And you were able to develop it by listening to the pain points, spending 18 months listening to pain points. Talk to us about the mindset it takes to actually convince a team, okay, this is really important. This research, it's going to be, it's going to take a little bit more time, but if we don't do it, the risk is too far great.
Yeah, it is interesting to get the team all on the same page. And a couple of things that I've had to do in that world is keep the team really small, because if you hire people too early, that contributes to the first of the problems that you called out, right? Running out of money, because you
Right.
spend money on things that you'll need later, but you don't need now. And so if you hire too many people that are, and often let's use the example of an engineer. You hire engineers because they build things. And so if you have an engineer that's showed up, ready to work, they're going to start building stuff.
Right.
But if you don't know what you want them to build, then you could see why that would be kind of counterproductive and say, well, we'll come back to that later. So a lot of it is early founder kind of, you need depth in early founding teams. You need very technical people who can put their hands on the keyboard and work really, really close to subject matter. And that's what's worked for myself, but all my companies. We've been really, really technical in the very beginning, very small, but also deliberate in saying, we're not going to go through out of our seed stage until we hit these milestones. And every year, every quarter, we set out what our OKRs are, and we map them to the funding stage. So what we were trying to do in our Series A, as an example, was get to product market fit. And so we come up with what are the criteria that we say justify being in product market fit, and work backwards and say, all right, we're going to build a plan to create that outcome. And, we'll adjust the plan as we need to, but where you're going. And so some of those example criteria would be that you can get to the source of the problem. You can qualify the customer in 3 questions or less. And you think,
I love it.
How hard is that? Well, it's pretty hard in the beginning until you get that pattern. You go, I can describe the problem in 30 seconds, 3 questions, and I know if you're in market or not. And so that, I think, is one of those. I think we had about 12 criteria. And we also focused on a very discrete number of customers that I call the dirty dozen.
I was just you love your metaphors. And as you were finishing, or as you were starting that, I was like, it's got to be the dirty dozen. That's great.
It is. And the dirty dozen is, I've done all my own companies, but I also invest in a lot of other startups. And I've seen this pattern on the early stage where, it comes down to sample size, right? My world, enterprise software isn't going to be the same for consumer products, right? Where 12 consumers isn't the same as 12 enterprises. But the important thing is that there's some small number that's very discrete. And what we find is that with those first 12 that you engage with that have the problem, and you take the product that you have and you say, hey, can I solve the problem as you see it with what I have? And statistically, the way that it kind of has broken out several times now is that you'll have about 8 companies of that 12 that like what you have and are willing to take it as it is. So that's
Mm,
good. And then you have another 2 that won't buy your product for any reason because of something they don't like about it or something they need that you can't provide. And you got to be able to walk away from those and
mm.
say, yeah, sorry, we're not, no soup for you. And then the last 2 are ones that say, hey, it would make it a lot easier if you could kind of come towards us with your product, where maybe add this feature or change this about what it is. And so you do want to adapt your product to fit and kind of expand into those other use cases. So at the end of it, you've got 12 that you've gone through a process with. You're really doing great if you have 10 of those as customers in the end, but it's not uncommon to have like 6. And
Right.
6 out of 12 is actually a huge win, even though some people might say, well, you didn't close half of them, something must be wrong. It's like, well, maybe, but
At
this
that
is a good way to be
stage,
disciplined. Yeah,
right.
exactly.
How, in your experience, how many companies are you talking to get to the 12, with that 3 question, they're in, they're out, to make it a viable, someone to move forward with?
So it's usually like when you're talking with people and you don't know if they're in market or not, right? Are they
Right,
addressing or are they not? So that math is going to be so varied depending on your use case, right? So
right.
some problems are pervasive, some are niche. So I can't really speak to the general number on how many, are out there for that reason. However, when you do find some that are in your niche and you say, hey, we want to do a customer development interview, just interview you for 30 minutes to see whether we can understand your problem and your priority of that problem. We have nothing to sell you, so don't worry about that. I just want your opinion. That's worth a lot. Um, I would say to get to the 12 in our dirty dozen, we probably went through, I'd say 200.
Wow. I mean, it's a very, very important way, a very important process of discernment, quite frankly, to determine, just that, that's 5%, if my math is correctly here on the fly,
Mhm.
to get to the dirty dozen that ultimately, you'll achieve greatness with 6 of them. At that stage, are you still thinking through jobs to be done from, are you going into messaging development at that stage, or is it truly still tech development with jobs to be done that will lead to the messaging?
Um, so it's like a pyramid and it builds, or a stair step and it builds either way. But in the beginning, and this is how to build a market from no market, right? How to build it
Right.
from scratch. The first phase is about defining the problem and getting
Mhm.
that pattern where people all say, I have the same problem, and you see that you can start to bound it by the commonalities. And you've got a nice pattern if you can get to that in 3 questions or less. So now you've got the problem defined. Only after you have that really well set, then should you start to build your software. And then as you've got now, and again, enterprise software, longer development cycle than some other
Than
apps. But
anything. Yeah.
yeah, so depending on what you're trying to do is bring something basic to market. And
Right.
I think good advice that was given by somebody years ago was, if you're not embarrassed with your first version of your product, you waited too long. And so
I use the 80% rule. If it's 80% there, let's go.
yeah, yeah.
You know,
And the thing that is so perennial in on that point is, I think it was well said by Voltaire. I think it was the original person that quoted it, but to paraphrase, don't make perfect the enemy of good. And
right.
I've seen so many situations where people say, oh, it's not ready for so and so to see it. It's not ready for, prime time. Of course it's not. But
Mhm.
when is it going to be ready? Right? Is it going to measure it in days? You're going to measure it in pixels? Are you going to measure it in releases? Like there's something where you just got to try. And so going back to the, hey, don't be afraid to put it in front of people. Know that it's not going to be great, but you just want to see if you're anywhere in the ballpark. And,
Right.
taking that all the way through, that means, like I can't show you here, but I live on a whiteboard.
Yeah.
Because drawing in pencil and a whiteboard eraser is a lot easier and cheaper than writing something in code and going through that whole process. So really committing to that, hey, let's figure this out quickly and move quickly and accept that we don't have a lot of perfect information and just get comfortable with that and build in some buffer so that you don't use up all your cash. You want to have a little bit of margin in case you have to make a change, because you're going to have to change. So instead of thinking a long end to end, like a transatlantic flight, I think of it more as like finding a little way to hop across islands to get to where you need to go, knowing that at each island, you may say, oh, shoot, we can't go there anymore. We got to go a different direction. And you make that small change instead of trying to change the whole transatlantic trajectory.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. The other thing that I think is really interesting here is, the team size. So you don't have a ton of engineers at the table, but who is at the table making these decisions on the Dirty Dozen and providing insight and input regarding what to do then and then next?
Yeah, it's interesting. My co-founder Topher, when I approached him, I said, "Hey, let's start this company." He said, "You're the perfect Danny Ocean," and
There we go
I
again.
wasn't sure what he meant. And he said, "No, he's George Clooney in Ocean's 11." And I said, "Well, why do you say that?" And he goes, "Well, because you know how to get each one person that's going to do whatever, the driver, the getaway driver, the guy who's going to break into the safe, and the guy who's going to figure out the computer systems." And so the cast that I put together in the early very beginning, co-founders are most important because you're in it for the long haul. So you want to make sure you have that kind of cohesion on expectations and all of that. And then from the beginning, we had somebody in professional services and customer support and customer success, right? Just to make sure whatever software our customers use, they would get amazing support. We had 2 developers and our founding CTO. And so we had the ability to produce software. And then we had a head of operations and a head of product, and no sales in the beginning. And the reason for that is you need your founders, you need that first person interaction, right? Where you're getting that high fidelity product input, right, in the market. And I've made the mistake in past companies of saying, oh, I need let's get someone to run sales, and just she'll bring in all these customers. Yet. Nothing to sell, exactly. Yeah. And it puts a layer in between the people building the product and the customer. So that's why we said no salespeople for almost 2 years, and founder selling, doing all of that. And that gets a lot of deep market into your DNA. It gets under your fingernails, gets into every, aspect of your way you think about the customer. And I would never replace that in any way. It's incredibly hard, huge amount of work, but that's, I think, the way to do it, right? Get a really small team. They're all committed to doing that. And then say, hey, we're not going to leave this kind of stage of the company until we all agree that these boxes are checked. Right. And then having that plan and everyone just working that plan, that was, super fun years, right? Like the first 1 or 2 years in these kind of
Well, you're so intimately involved at that stage. At what stage? So, you've got seed funding, maybe a Series A, and you're growing, not scaling yet because you need a lot of money for that, but you're growing. At what point does marketing and sales, enter the room?
So we bring in Series A, you've got a product and now you're getting product market fit. And at that point, that's when I start to ramp up more spend on marketing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it though is content creation, which means a lot of writing for myself. I've probably written the most words for the company in the whole history.
Well,
And
when you know it that well and you've interacted and you've got such great stories and feedback firsthand, I mean, it's a perfect, role for you to take, and nothing more authentic than that.
exactly. So you have content you put out there, and then the marketing that you bring in is about trying to find more customers, right? Where you're trying to get the messaging out, focus on the thought leadership. I make a huge investment in the analyst relations and media. I think that's one of the best places to put money
Oh,
early.
yeah, I agree.
And then once you get through Series A and you got that product market fit, then we move to Series B. And the milestones and the metrics change with raising Series B. We raised ours last year, and it was now the game is scale your go to market. So you need to
Mm-hmm.
use the money between Series B and then Series C to get that go to market motion. And so now the product, it'll move ahead. It's got its own inertia. Now the code that you need to crack is, what is your sales cycle? Are you going to do
Mm-hmm.
sales led growth or product led growth or a hybrid? If you're going to do one or the other, what's your plan to do that? Who do you need to hire? How do you ramp that team up? And so kind of figuring out that is sales and field execution, early
Right.
things.
How
And
does, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no. And just that by the end of that, when you go to Series C, where we're headed next, it's all about your numbers and your metrics. And so
Right.
your efficiencies, your customer acquisition costs, and things like that. So we put all of those numbers in our headlights right now to say, we're going to start acting like that company in the future today. So we don't have this risk of transitioning from a Series B to a Series C. We're going to have the metrics, we're going to have the numbers, and have that fluency on how you operationalize the go to market. So initially go to market or product market fit, then go to market fit, and then the metrics, the put money in, get money out kind of stage.
And how does brand fit into the magical mix here?
Brand, you know, this is a dear thing to my heart. I think of brand, it gets a bad rap by so many people who don't understand it, and they
Right.
think it's about a logo or it's about a color
A
scheme.
color. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like,
It's about
no,
what the customer perceives you to be,
you're
right?
right, right, Lori. And I think one of the challenges for branding in a very dry market like cybersecurity, selling to Fortune 500 companies, what we've done is we've incorporated the whole branding around I named our software platform Mavericks,
Mhm.
and
Which is
that's
great.
a reflection of the two things. One, it's the biggest wave in North America, and just off where I used to live near San Francisco. And that other use of the word is like the definition of a maverick is someone who's going to do their own thing, go to their own drummer, all of those kind of things. And so we wanted to really pull that into the DNA of our culture. And so we refer to people on the team as mavericks. And
I love it.
the branding starts internally, right? And so we hire people who reflect the kind of cultural values of that we want to aspire to hold, and then we bring it into the market. So for instance, last year, 2 years ago at RSA security conference, we had a big splash because we showed up through this party, and we were giving away an amazing surfboard, and we had all these great images and talking about waves, and everyone else was talking about the same thing, right? And it was just different colors and different buzzwords. And here we were changing the conversation and not disrupting things. And
Right.
people were coming by, and our trade show booth is the one that stands out, not in a inflammatory way, but in a way that's like, hey, is that on brand? And it helps us stand out. And people remember, oh, that's the company that had all those cool giveaways. Not that the tchotchke is why, but they got the vibe and they came into our party, and we don't have booth at the trade show. We do it more like person to person. So it's kind of bringing culture to the customer and making sure that you have integrity throughout the whole aspect, end to end, so you don't lose that brand because you're just blowing in the wind of whatever's cool, whatever buzzword that's coming around.
Yeah, I love that. And you've really described a lot of differentiation too. So it's not just your direct competitors that you may want to differentiate. It could be a perception that you need to differentiate from. If it's a brand new product, and they don't have anything to compare it against, then, what are we going to do to differentiate ourselves against that mindset? And there's just so many things that become a part of brand that I think a lot of people just push aside, and they don't dive deep enough into it. And those very early learnings from day one with the Dirty Dozen are what bring a lot of that to life.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting when you get a reputation, right? That's a brand coming back to you, reflected in what people say about you. In kind of like a secret shopper kind of way.
Oh,
I
yeah.
like to turn my badge upside down so people don't know that I'm with Strata. And I've talked to other marketers and people on showroom floors and say, well, have you heard of this company? What did you hear about Strata? And hear what they have to say about it. And it's been interesting because, years ago, it was like, I never heard of the company. And now it's, oh, they're that company doing that new stuff with identity orchestration. And it's
resonating.
And then it's working, right?
Yeah, and that's the awareness piece, right? If you've got a better brand approach, which you do, then the recall and the awareness is going to be achieved more quickly. And that recall, like you just described, is exactly what the outcome is that you want to be able to achieve. How do you assure that your team is on brand, that they're delivering the message correctly, that they're responding to needs correctly, that they're anticipating need?
You interview a lot of people before you hire anyone. And I think we've really front loaded our cultural screening into our hiring. And so we have a really good track record. Virtually no, I think we're coming up on a year, no unplanned attrition, right? So when you can get
fantastic.
through, like,
there's not many brands that can say that.
Exactly.
Ever. For pre-COVID, let alone post-COVID.
Yeah, and I think so that's how you measure, right? And we do net promoter score for the employees, and we're always trying to inculcate this communication feedback loop, right? So people know we care. And I think that when leadership sends the message that you care, people, they respond to that. And it has to be authentic naturally, right? I mean, you can't fake it. People see through that. So it has to be genuine. And one of the things that I think has been an interesting way to kind of keep people in that on brand, if you will, on the cultural brand, is to operationalize it in culture. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. We had opened up our first office 2 weeks before, in the very first week of March 2020. 2 weeks in, COVID hits, office has to shut down, and all of a sudden we have this little, it's like the baby chick coming out of the shell, and all of a sudden, storm comes up, and it's like, oh, deal with it. So we had to be distributed right away, even people who live, half a mile away. And so we learned to really figure out how to build culture over Zoom. And I know it sounds kind of, other people have done it, but it's not easy.
You're more innovative, I think, because the confines of, the brick walls and the ceiling are totally different for everyone. It's not like you're in one building.
You're right. And so how do you get that kind of, hey, I know Lori because, she has a golden retriever and so do I. And so you have this like
Connection.
yeah, small
Yeah,
things, they're important. So we have this way that we do it at Strata, and we call it Aloha Friday. And
of
it,
course. I love that.
yeah, well, look, I'm always ready. I've got a
Oh,
leg.
I love it. That's wonderful. And you've got a floral shirt on, so that, that just goes with it. And it's Wednesday that we're recording this, so impressive.
Yeah, yeah,
You're
exactly.
ready.
But what we do on Aloha Friday is just kind of give a shout out to people at the end of the week and
Mm,
share with the company, here's what we got done this week, and sharing all the small victories and the minor setbacks, the big setbacks, right? And having that ability to give a shout out to someone who did a great job and say, hey, uh, Sarah, you did an awesome job organizing these podcasts. They've been going great. Thank you for doing that. That's 5 seconds. But when the person hears that, it's a whole lot more impactful than
right.
what 5 seconds of oxygen and out of your breath would be. But it also sends a message to other people around the company that, hey, you know what? This company is about doing good things and being recognized for it. And I want to give a shout out too. And so
Yeah.
next thing you know, you get this, I don't know, everyone's excited and just given and it's not hokey or corny. It's just like,
It's
hey,
not.
thank you for
Yeah.
your help. Appreciate it.
We
And it
do
feels great.
something very similar. We're not as creative as you. We just call it weekly wins. And we talk about, we always have to talk about someone else, not ourselves, and the impact that that person made that week to achieve whatever KPI or OKR it was. It's a lot of fun. What's next? What's around the corner for the brand? I mean, you're always thinking about what's next. I mean, you've got that mindset.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. There are two good things and one concern. Um, the good things that we're launching the next generation of our product, and
Congratulations.
thank you. It's been out for a while. Just we're a really disciplined company. We want to make sure everything's ready for prime time, but it is, and so that's exciting. That's going live, this quarter, and we're excited about that. The thing that I'm a bit concerned with, honestly, is this talk of recession
Yeah,
and
I
all of
agree.
these things. And I've seen it before. I saw it, managed through the global financial crisis and the
Mhm.
whole, .com crash and all of that. So I know I've been through the trauma, and I'm always just tempered in my enthusiasm. And consequently, we don't hire right now. We're
Right.
like saying, hey, let's tighten our belt so we don't ever have to do layoffs. And I think that has been a shared responsibility within the company to say, look, we don't want to, so many companies doing layoffs, they got ahead of themselves maybe on their spend, or I don't know, a lot of different reasons, but I don't want to be in a position where we got to scale back. So we just been saying, look, everyone run a little hot, because if it's better that we do a little extra, carry a little extra water, than ever find ourselves in a situation where we're overextended. So that's the concern. And then the other good thing that I'm excited about is just how the market is inevitably moving this way, and
Right.
that the momentum that's going on, that the people are, even in the face of these recessionary kind of things, there's a positive attitude, right? People are trying to
Mhm.
figure things out. It's not like the gloom and doom times that I've seen in the past. So
Right.
I'm hopeful that, we can find a way to, get through, and hopefully this isn't a big recession and it's more of a correction, and, get people to hit their priorities. It's not a bad thing to make sure you're focused on the most important thing all the time. So I think some good comes out of it, and I'm really excited about where we're headed.
Well, we're a resilient human, kind at this stage, right? I mean, if we take a look at what we've been through, and this agency's been through many recessions as well. And I would say within each one, we became stronger business people because you are forced to solve business issues and business problems in a very, very unique and different way, with resources that you may or may not have anymore. You just roll up your sleeves and get smart and solve those situations very, very differently. It's interesting. I think as I reflect on, all those ups and downs throughout my own career, this potential recession, I think, is the one that's more of a bobblehead, as far as opinion is concerned, because people, it's literally, it could be, 8 hours ago, someone's like, the sky is falling. And then, right now it's like the market's up. So there's more bobbing and weaving with this one that I think I can reflect on with any other one that we've been through.
Yeah, you're right. And I think you look at what, they talk about black swan events, and, I don't feel like there's a big black swan happening, but
Right.
that's the nature of black swans, right? You don't see it coming.
Right.
So I think hopefully there isn't a big, event, like, hopefully this debt ceiling thing gets sorted out, so we don't have any self-inflicted wound, right? Like, why do
Right.
that? Let's not get distracted. Let's just keep building. And I do think people are a bit more resilient in terms of, especially people who, like, sounds like you've gone through it as well, right? And so
Right.
now, hey, the storm's coming. That's okay. We'll live through this one. We lived
Yeah.
through the last one. Let's just, go get prepared and act like some awareness of
Yeah.
what's about to happen.
I love it. I tell you, Eric, you've got a cheerleader in me. I'm so excited for
Thank
you and the
Lori.
team and everything that you're doing. It is so fun to watch from the outside. And I tell you, I've just deeply enjoyed our conversation today. I appreciate your insights. You just sharing the secret sauce on so many things, the way that you manage the difference between, the growth and scaling and really some of those signs that you look at. And, I think that we're going to have to do a chalkboard on all the metaphors that you've used throughout the conversation as well, because they certainly are fun. You are definitely a motivator. We really appreciate your appearance on the Integrate and Ignite podcast.
Thanks for having me, Lori. It was great. I enjoyed every minute.
Thank you.
This episode is complete. Head over to avocetcommunications.com for more ways to scale and grow your business. And be sure to tune in regularly for insights and motivation with host Lori Jones and her guests on the Integrate and Ignite Marketing Podcast.